Welcome to True Crime IRL. I'm Kelly Berensbrink, and today we're going to revisit the story of Isaiah Sweet, teen murderer. But in this episode, you're going to hear the story from a different perspective, that of Isaiah's mother, Stacy Sweet. I'm going to give you a very brief summary of this story, but you're definitely going to want to go back to episode 23 and listen to that to hear all the details. Isaiah Sweet was a 17-year-old living in a very small town in Iowa. At just 4 years old, Isaiah was taken out of his mother's custody and placed in the home of his grandparents, Rick and Janet Sweet. There were a lot of reasons why this happened, but long story short, Isaiah's mom, Stacy Sweet, was in an abusive relationship, and due to substance abuse, domestic abuse, and more, she wasn't able to care for him. Isaiah was raped by a family acquaintance at 4 years old, and this is ultimately what led him to be taken away from the home. Stacy wasn't able to give Isaiah the kind of life she wanted her child to have, and she was well aware of this. She wanted a better life for him, but she also knew that he would not have a better life if that life was in the custody of his grandparents, Rick and Janet. Nevertheless, Stacy's parents were granted custody of Isaiah, and his life would become part of a tragic cycle of dysfunction and abuse that would be passed from generation to generation, finally ending in 17-year-old Isaiah ultimately ending that cycle by shooting Rick and Janet in cold blood on Mother's Day weekend 2012. Now, I have to apologize for some of the poor audio quality in this recorded phone conversation. There are some parts that are difficult to hear, but it's an interesting conversation with a lot of good takeaways. It gives you a better understanding of the why in this brutal murder. We always strive to know the why when these tragedies happen. And the answer is never truly good enough because lives are lost and families are ruined. But at least it gives us some small glimpse into why these things happen. The precursors, the red flags, all of that. And now for my conversation with Stacy Sweet, mom of convicted killer Isaiah Sweet.
Have you talked to Isaiah lately?
Oh, yeah, I talk to him on a regular basis. I talk to him a few times a week.
I've been able to talk to him a few times too, and I've enjoyed it. He's really funny. He's very smart, like very smart. I was curious kind of about your life growing up with Rick and Janet. Now, was he your dad or stepdad?
Yeah, no, he's my biological.
Okay, I wasn't sure about that. So I just wondered what your story was growing up with them as your parents.
Life was less than perfect for Stacy Sweet and her siblings growing up in the home of Richard and Janet Sweet, her parents. There was substance abuse, there was a lot of volatility, there was physical abuse, and sexual abuse that Stacy is going to tell us about right now in this phone call.
It was not a very good childhood at all. I had a very abusive childhood. My dad was very physically abusive towards me, and not until after everything happened with Isaiah and I got into therapy did I uncover the sexual abuse that I had suppressed. So that made it a lot harder to even deal with.
Yeah.
It was already hard enough.
You had step-siblings too living in the house with you?
Yeah, I think that was probably the difference between what had happened with Isaiah and what had happened with me was that I actually had siblings in the house that I could talk to. You know, like my sister lived with us for a short period of time, like a couple years. Alicia.
Oh,
Alicia
okay.
is my full-blooded sister.
Okay.
Angie is Janet's daughter.
Growing up in an abusive home with so much volatility, it's no wonder that Stacy Sweet had a lot of problems as she transitioned into adulthood. It was very difficult for her to function as an adult and as a parent, and this would really affect Stacy as she began having children of her own.
I read, for whatever reasons, Isaiah went to live with Rick and Janet when he was, was it 4 years old or around there?
He was like 3.5. Well, what happened was, I was going through a breakup with, my youngest son's father, and, he and I had been together for 3 years, and I honestly was an emotional basket case. I was really young. I had Isaiah when I was 19, and coming out of that abusive home, I was not a good mother. You know, I wasn't stable enough emotionally to have small children.
Yeah.
I really wasn't. And what happened was, when he moved out, when we split up, he had the electricity in his name, the utilities got turned off. My dad turned me in for not having utilities on because he wanted to take Isaiah from me. He was trying to take Isaiah from me from the time I had him, and that's what he did to get Isaiah placed with him. Right, and I had a daughter before I had Isaiah that I gave up for adoption. Okay. Isaiah was my second child.
Since Rick and Janet were like blood relatives, I guess, you know, the state kind of wants to keep families together, but you knew that that was not going to be a good situation, and you actually, is this true? You actually said he would be better off in foster care than he would with...
Yes, I told them that he would be better off in foster care than he would with them, because I knew that, you know, my dad had a vendetta against me for giving my daughter up for adoption. He tried to control that situation, and he wanted to keep my daughter, and I didn't want her in his home, so that's why I gave her up for adoption, because I couldn't take care of her, and he told me from the time Isaiah was born that he was going to take him from me.
Why do you think he wanted that so badly?
Well, him and my stepmom never had kids together. They weren't able to have kids because she had her tubes tied, and they always talked about the fact that they wanted to have a child of their own, and they wanted to take Isaiah from me.
That's twisted.
Yeah.
He struggled, obviously, with some mental health issues, and he got into some trouble related to that, and he missed school a lot and things like that. Do you think, what are your thoughts on that? Was that related mainly to the way he was being kind of abused and just not able to process all of that, and he just kind of like acted out? What do you think about
what happened was, the thing that really made it escalate in the end were there were a few things that factored in. I moved out there to try, because my dad was trying to keep Isaiah from me, but they had lived in Pennsylvania until, you know, while Isaiah was in elementary school. Isaiah was actually in talented and gifted classes for almost 2 years. He was so smart.
Shortly before Isaiah murdered his grandparents, the entire Sweet family had become involved in a huge family argument over the estate of Stacy Sweet's grandmother, who had passed away. And this event would cause a ton of fighting within the family and added to the intense drama and chaos that was already taking place.
So what happened was, my grandmother passed away, and this is what made everything escalate. My grandmother passed away in 2005, and when she passed away, right before she passed away, she wanted to switch everything in her will over to me and my sister. And my dad found out about that. She ended up passing away before she could have it switched over, but my dad knew that she wanted everything switched over to me and my sister, because my stepmom was trying to make it sound like my grandmother was senile, there was something wrong with her, and wanted to take all her money and put her in a home and do all this stuff. My grandma was furious.
Yeah.
She didn't want my stepmom having any of her money at all. So when my dad found out that she was trying to leave him nothing, then, because my grandmother didn't like the way that they treated me and my sister, and she just didn't want my it was pretty much my stepmom that she was angry with. So this was my grandma Sweet. She left her 10% of her estate to my sister and I, but we weren't to have it until we were 35 years old. Well, my dad lied and said that he was the executor. He was supposed to set that up. He was supposed to have all the money set up for us. And he lied and said that we weren't supposed to get any of it. He refused to let us see any of the paperwork. Well, we went and got it ourselves. And it was more of the principle. It wasn't really so much about the money. It was the principle of the fact that he was not living up to his obligations and his, what he was supposed to do in honor of my grandmother. And about a year before this all happened with Isaiah, my sister and I went to the Manchester Police Department and we pressed charges with my dad for selling sex because we didn't know how to hire a lawyer. And they said the cheapest way for us to do it would be to go to the police department and have them actually press charges. So we gave the police department the paperwork and showed them that he didn't fulfill his duties as the executor. And Manchester Police Department just sat on the charges for almost a year. And my sister and I called, a couple times a month, and it was like, oh, he says he's going to come up with some paperwork so he can prove this, he can prove that. He never did. So about 2 weeks before Isaiah did what he did, my dad told Isaiah, your mom's lying, she's not getting any money, because I had planned on using the money that I got to get Isaiah out with me, to live with me, and he was like, your mom's lying, she can't get you, she has no way, she's not going to have any money, there's no way that she's going to win this case, she's making it up.
So Stacy and her siblings and Isaiah and the grandparents, Richard and Janet, they already had a lot of just anger and frustration built up towards each other, and this financial argument that they were having made everything so much worse. And it seemed like everyone was pinning each other against each other, and Isaiah wanted to live with his mom, but Rick Sweet kind of tried to pin Isaiah against his mom, and eventually Isaiah really started to give up hope that he would ever get back with his mom again.
That was his light at the end of the tunnel, and my dad shut it down and said it was all a lie. That was what was really making things escalate in the home. That was one thing. The other thing was that Janet was in late stages of leukemia and was very close to dying. And so my dad already was taking oxycodone or Oxycontin, one or the other, for some injury he had to his elbow. But he was also taking her painkillers at the same time because she didn't like pain pills. They said his tox screen, I think, was like 3 times the legal limit, what he's supposed to have in his bloodstream. So he was taking those every day, plus drinking every day. And Isaiah would quit school and staying home from school to take care of her because my dad wouldn't take care of her because he was inebriated.
I was going to say he probably wasn't in any shape to be able to take care of her with all the stuff he was doing. Yeah.
So keep in mind, Isaiah was 17 years old. He was being raised by his grandparents. His grandfather was basically a drug addict. He abused prescription pain pills, and he was a known alcoholic basically his entire adult life. His grandmother was very verbally abusive as well, and she was in the late stages of cancer and was dying. So this is the home that Isaiah was being raised in. It was very dysfunctional. It was very chaotic, very abusive. It was not a recipe for good mental health at all.
And he was an alcoholic as well, wasn't he?
Yeah, he drank from 11 o'clock in the morning until he went to bed every night, and I don't remember him ever missing a day drinking, ever.
Wow, even when you were younger?
No. He got clean for about a year and a half one time. He went to rehab, and then he started again. That was it. My whole life he drank.
So because of that, what you grew up with, you had a hard life too. You did not have it easy at all. And you were abused, and then it was just kind of like a cycle. So do you have any good memories of them, or when you think back about them, is it all just a lot of pain?
When I was a little girl, before he met my stepmom, and him and my mom got divorced, I wanted to go live with my dad because my dad treasured me when I was little because he was adopted, and I was his first flesh and blood that he knew. Yeah, I don't know what happened after he met her. He just got like real mean and nasty after he met her.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I mean, I had really good memories of my dad when I was little.
Your early years were good.
Well, there were things that were not good. There was another family member that was sexually abusing me, and I remember telling my parents about it when I was 3 years old, and they were like, well, just next time you go back over there, just don't sit on his lap or don't talk to him or I'm like, and then I think back on it as an adult, like, what do you mean next time you go? Like, if my kid told me somebody was doing something to him, I wouldn't say, here's how you defend yourself. Say that to a 30-year-old.
There wouldn't be a next time.
No.
You weren't really protected from even a young age.
No.
Stacy Sweet and her siblings were abused by Richard and Janet Sweet when they were growing up. Isaiah was abused by his grandparents when he was growing up in their home. It was a generational cycle, and it caused so much pain for everyone involved. Stacy Sweet recalls the day that she found out the news that her parents had been murdered.
When you got the news that Mother's Day weekend, I mean, is it just too painful to think about? And when you think about it, what are your thoughts? How did the day go for you?
I think when I think about it, I felt like I was it's really hard to explain. It was like an autopilot.
Like, is this really happening? It's a dream.
I felt like I was an autopilot, like I was walking around like a zombie.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that when I first found out about it, I was really afraid. Somebody from Manchester called me that I had been friends with and told me that the police were at the house and that they were both killed and that Isaiah was missing. So Isaiah had called me that morning and told me Happy Mother's Day before I went to work. So I tried to call him right after my friend in Manchester called me. Mm-hmm. And I tried to call him and I couldn't get through to him. And I thought something had happened to him too. Like somebody had done something to all of this.
So that's exactly what I said too in the podcast episode. As a parent, that's what I would think too. Like, he's missing. I mean, did somebody take him? Is he in somebody's trunk? Like, you just don't know. Yeah, that's exactly what I would have thought as well.
When Richard and Janet Sweet's bodies were found in their home, murdered, there were so many questions. Things like this just did not happen in this small town in Iowa. And one of the biggest questions left unanswered at that moment was, where was Isaiah? Did somebody take him? Who could have done this? Well, they would soon find out.
Did people immediately think that he could have done this?
I didn't think that. I don't know what other people were thinking, but I didn't feel that way until they started to question it on the news because they said he had stole the car. Then it started to sound like, I was like, but it's so weird because I talked to him, but now he's not answering his phone and he always answers his phone when I call him.
A child killing their parents or their legal guardian is just pretty crazy, and it's not something we hear about very often. But I think we're beginning to see a pattern here, and there's a picture being painted of what was going on behind closed doors in the Sweet family. And I think we can see how the people involved in this story were just heading towards something really bad happening, and it did.
In your wildest dreams, could you ever have seen this happening?
I knew that it was getting bad because a week before it happened, Isaiah was on house arrest, so he couldn't leave. And he said that he overheard Rick and Janet in the living room talking about killing him.
Killing Isaiah?
Yeah. And he was scared to death of the police because about a year before that, they had come when he was sleeping and woke him up out of his bedroom and handcuffed him and took him to a mental institution. So he didn't trust the police at all.
I read about that as well. They had him committed.
Yeah. I had called child services and told them everything that was going on in the house. And they sent me a letter saying that everything I said was unfounded and that Isaiah was fine. In almost every police report that they wrote, they reported that he was intoxicated.
That Rick was?
That my dad was intoxicated, yeah. If you don't live in a nice home, and you live in a trailer park, and you go to somebody's house and they got something going on in the home, and the guardian is intoxicated every time you go over there, that child's going to be removed.
There were numerous 911 calls in the year prior to Janet and Rick Sweet's death. And what Stacy is explaining here is that pretty much every time the police would come over to the home, Rick would be intoxicated. Most of these 911 calls were regarding arguments that Janet and Rick were having with Isaiah. It seemed as though Rick and Janet were not totally able to control his behavior on their own, and they called 911 anytime they had a problem. And some of the 911 calls were kind of things that you wouldn't call 911 for, kind of insignificant and almost ridiculous disputes, things that really just should have been handled on their own.
One of the 911 calls that I read was Janet, her pain medication was missing and she was blaming Isaiah for taking it, but maybe it was Rick because he was taking her medication too.
Yeah, he was taking her medication, but it could have been that Isaiah did take it and he was the one that was mad.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
What I wanted to say, though, was that the night that he called me and said that they were planning on killing him, is he's really freaking out about this case about me and my sister. He knows that he has to go to court in a couple weeks. Like, this is really coming out right now, and he wanted to do something to Isaiah before he went to court to try to hurt me. That's what I felt like.
Yeah.
Yes, you heard Stacy right. In the week prior to Janet and Richard Sweet's deaths, Isaiah Sweet told his mom that he overheard his grandparents plotting to kill him. They were angry with Isaiah. Isaiah had become a real problem in their lives, and Isaiah's story is that it was kind of going to be either them or him, and his mom gave him advice on how to keep himself safe in the home. She told him to prop a chair in front of the door, and if he heard anyone trying to enter his room in the middle of the night, he should flee out through the window. So this gives you an idea of how things were in the days before the murder. Very intense.
I told Isaiah to prop a chair up under his doorknob, wedge the door, that I said so that if he tried to get into your room, I said have something handy to defend yourself if you need to defend yourself. I said, and him trying to get in and, you'll know when the door gets stuck from the chair, you'll know it's time to jump out the window.
Yeah.
That's what I had to tell him. He went to the police and he was unauthorized.
He's literally still a child going through this. He's not in a safe place. There's pretty much no one he can turn to for help. He's stuck in this house. He thinks his grandparents want to kill him. They're involved in a huge financial lawsuit and they're abusing him. And you, too, having to witness it, worrying about your child.
I wasn't even there, but there was nothing I could do from Manchester or Pittsburgh, and there was nothing I could do until I had some money to get him out of there,
There were like 20 911 calls in the year leading up to their deaths, and it just sounded like a hellish environment to be living in, so.
Not funny.
Yeah.
It's ironic is that they did the same thing to me when they would call the police on me. They would do things to me and try to make me feel crazy and like gaslight me and then make me feel like there was something wrong with me and I needed to feel bad. They would call the cops on me all the time. They would assault me and then they would call the cops on me and be like, take her to foster care. And they did the same thing to him. They said, take him to foster care. Like that. That's not a thing.
Not only did Isaiah Sweet battle a lot of abuse and a lot of just trauma from his past, but he had a lot of mental issues as well, some developmental delays, mental health concerns, and things like that.
One of the psychiatrists or psychologists was saying maybe possibly a bipolar disorder diagnosis, but they didn't follow through with that or follow up with that. And he had like ADHD and some social developmental issues, which definitely results out of a trauma like that. I'm sure he had PTSD and some developmental issues from the abuse and all of that stuff going on when he was younger. Do you know a lot about what the doctors said or anything?
Well, he said that all the years that they had him on medication, said that he didn't have the ADHD that they said that they were medicating him for.
So all of the years of taking a medication that you don't need could have altered his brain in some way as well.
Not only that, but they were, you don't think of it as harm drugs, but, they were giving him like 3 or 4 melatonin every night. And if you read about children taking melatonin in an excessive amount, that really has a lot of bearing on their development.
Yeah, it's a chemical in your brain, and when you mess with that stuff, you can really alter the way your brain works. And
Right.
he had so much going on in that young little developing brain. It was so much. So he was 17 when he did what he did, and it was, I guess, shocking and surprising, but when it's a child who is going through what he was going through, then again, I feel like it's not all that shocking. They're just in a rage and they can't control their emotions anyway when they're young. Their brains are not done developing. And what do you think about that?
So, honestly, I know how it felt. You just want to make it stop. You don't know how to make it stop, and you just want to make it stop. You can't make it stop. And it's relentless.
Mm-hmm.
So relentless. And I remember laying in bed when I was a teenager and fantasizing about killing them. It was like how he confronted them and like the graphics. It was hard for me, but it actually put it in better perspective when I heard his confession, because I had pictured him coming out of his room. So when you walk out of Isaiah's room, you are right open into the living room and the couch is facing you. So they would have been sitting on the couch facing him when he walked out of his bedroom, and that's how I envisioned it happening. When I listened to him since he was on the railing from the basement.
What Stacy Sweet is referring to here in this part of the conversation is the taped interrogation and confession that her son gave in the police station.
When I shot my grandpa, he just dropped, and I heard blood just pouring out of his head. My grandma looks over and she's like, "What's going on?" Boom. Shot right there, grazed her head, and she was still moving. So I shot her right here through her head.
How close were you, Isaiah?
I could have made the shot. You guys up to make the shot, but I was probably 10, 15 feet away. If that. Well, honestly, from the barrel of the gun that my grandpa said, 8 feet.
Okay, did he see it coming?
Couldn't even notice.
I mean, where was
He was so drunk and high on his oxycontin and hydrocodone.
Okay.
He didn't know where.
Let me do this if I can. If you're stand up real quick. If I'm your grandpa sitting on the couch like you, are we this close?
He was sitting like this.
Okay.
I was down like that. I was right about here on the stairs.
Okay, so is he hunched over? Is he asleep?
Yeah, no, he's just out of it on his drugs.
So
He was hunched over, like, kind of trying to watch TV, trying to smoke a cigarette.
Where's the TV at?
Right in front of where they were.
Like right here?
Oh, let's say 5 more feet forward.
Okay. So you're back over there. Go back to where you were.
And this would be the stairs. There, I was on the 3rd or 4th stair down. Well, I was on the 4th or 5th stair down at first, so I could see his hair from there. So when I took the first shot, I took one step up, a stair up, so I could see his whole head shot.
Where did the first shot hit?
First shot, straight through his head.
She recalls how she felt when she found out the details of the murder.
That made more sense. That's not looking at them in their face and confronting them.
Right. They didn't know it was coming, for one thing, and he wanted it to stop, like you said, and he just wanted it to be over. So
he probably was in the basement because that's where he went. That's where his toys were. That's where his Legos were, his skateboard, his bike. Like, everything was in the basement, and the gun cabinet was in the basement.
okay.
And so he probably heard them maybe plotting or talking and just being crazy and inciting, like, anxiety in him, and that's when he probably just did what he did.
He snapped.
Yeah.
I don't think he was thinking straight and the real consequences of his actions.
And that's what they talk about when they talk about the teenager's brain, and that they can't process results or you know what I mean, like the cause and effect of things happening, like the long term. Their brain doesn't allow them to do that.
And they can't control anger and emotion the way they can as an adult either at that age. My next thing I wanted to talk about, so he was 17, but they started the trial and they charged him as an adult.
it floors me. I don't think a minor should ever be charged as an adult. And were you involved in the trial? Like, did they call you as a witness or anything like that?
They started the trial, and I intended to come there when I could be called as a witness. Here's what his attorneys told him and told me. When I spoke at his sentencing, they told me, don't say anything bad about Rick and Janet. Well, that's Isaiah's whole defense.
Yeah.
Don't say anything bad about Rick and Janet because the judge will frown upon it of you speaking ill of the dead, and so don't say anything bad about them. That's what his attorney told me.
Yeah.
That's what they told Isaiah.
That does not seem like a good defense tactic there.
No. After the trial, they told Isaiah, I think that they were going to give him some kind of deal, and that he could just go ahead and combine the two charges as one, and that was his deal. And he didn't think that there was any way out, so he just took it. And I didn't even have a chance to get out there because he took that deal so fast.
Right, yeah. And so, I mean, were you following the trial? Was anyone updating you, or were you able to, I mean, did you know what was going on where you were, or did you have to wait until the end, or were people updating you or anything?
I was calling his attorney like at the end of the day. They were awful. They didn't do anything for him, like I said. They said, don't speak ill of the dead. The dead is going to frown upon that, and that'll be bad for Isaiah.
Did he take the stand in his own behalf at all? I feel like maybe that would have been good if he could tell his story, or did they talk much about the abuse that Isaiah went through?
Well, that was another thing, is they did a deposition with me and my sister. They did a deposition, and they didn't want to talk about anything that me and my sister brought up. Nothing.
I feel like that's the whole defense, basically. Like,
yeah, they wanted they wanted Isaiah to just go away because it was their small town, and they wanted it to just go away.
So he took a plea. So he wasn't even found guilty, was he? It was just, he took the plea deal.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like a full trial.
Yeah.
So then I saw a video of you on the news saying he has a good heart. He's been through a lot, all of that, but you weren't able to really say the truth.
The reason I did that was because there was a lady on the news the night before, and I just remember this vividly. And they were interviewing people out in front of the Manchester courthouse about Isaiah's case. What do you think about this happening in your small community? And this woman said, why didn't something happen? Why didn't the police know something was going on in this house? And I just wanted to, when she said that, I wanted to say they did know.
They
did. I wanted everybody to know that they did know. Everybody knew. Child services knew. Everybody knew, but nobody did anything. You know, and I just wanted to, that's why I went on the news, because I wanted people to know that people did know.
I feel like this is a case where the system truly failed a child. He made the decision to do what he did, but he was a child. He was a child, and there were so many steps along the way where he could have gotten help, or some, the state could have intervened or something.
Somebody could have stepped in.
Yeah.
I think I read that abusive situations like that I was in and that Isaiah was in that home, that usually 5% of teenagers that are in a situation like that will lash out and defend themselves, whereas the other 95% will attempt suicide. And I attempted suicide. I was in ICU for like 4 days. I attempted suicide when I was 16.
Because of everything you were going through.
It was because of them. Yeah, absolutely. Because I wanted out. And he took the other route that is the very, very small percent.
So he was charged as an adult. He was sentenced as an adult. He was sentenced with life without parole. And then the Supreme Court stepped in and said that it's cruel and unusual punishment for a minor to ever get life without parole.
That was like the biggest miracle ever for me. I mean, my son is actually going to have a chance to have a life and live his life. The feeling that I had when I found out about everything was that they did this to me. And, then they did it to my son. And now they're gone. And they still are touching his life even though they're gone. Like, it just was the most sickening feeling ever. But I just want him to live. He deserves to have a life. He has deserves to have a life.
And I truly believe this. The person who committed that crime is not who he is right now. It's literally not the person. It's not the same person because a decade of growth and development has gone by where his brain has changed. Literally, his brain has grown into that of an adult, and he can understand now what he did, and he can work through his problems.
Yeah, and Isaiah had such a good heart. Like, he gets so much joy. He gets all his joy and happiness from making other people laugh and smile. Like, that's just how he's always been. And if he can't make you laugh or make you happy, it makes him very sad. And I think that that's the thing that broke his heart the most about them, that he really tried to make them so happy. But there was nothing he could do.
He said in our conversation, he just wanted them to love him.
He did.
And that's when he started crying. So it is very heartbreaking. But with that Supreme Court decision, it does go from basically a death sentence for him to there is a chance. There is a chance now. And he was telling me a little bit about the parole process, and so far he's been eligible a few times, and he said that the prison system actually went a while without even letting him know that he could have had a parole hearing, or they skipped it a couple years, or I don't know all the details there, but it sounds like there was a clerical mess up thing, and he should have had a chance, but he didn't. Anyway, he probably would have been denied at that point, and he's been denied over and over again. But he knows, he says he knows absolutely for sure one of these days he's going to be out. And what are your thoughts on that?
I can't wait.
Yeah.
I can't wait till he is.
Yeah.
I mean, and he's really focused on helping make sure that this doesn't happen to any more teenage kids. Like, he wants to make that his life's work. He wants to start a nonprofit to help teenage kids that are being overlooked. Well, initially, whenever it was probably within the first 2 years after it happened, I think, Dr. Phil wanted me to come on. And Isaiah said no. He said, what if Angie goes on there, my stepsister, my stepmom's daughter, and she says all kinds of bad stuff about me? I don't want her to go on there and say bad stuff about me, so don't do it. Like, he was so concerned about people saying bad stuff about him that he didn't want it out there. And I'm like, Isaiah, I think he can put things in perspective now, but back then he was so upset that Angie was upset with him that he didn't want to do it.
I've read and watched a lot of her videos. She seemed very upset. Well, how is that situation now? Is she still angry? Do you talk to her? Does Isaiah talk to her?
Angie was abusive towards me when I was a little girl. She was a lot older than me. Like, I remember when I was in 6th grade and she was getting ready to graduate high school, and she used to, when my dad would beat me, she'd be like, I never seen her really good. Why don't you do it again? Like, she's been evil to me. And the funny part is that I thought, like, how she acted like she hated my dad. She didn't talk to my dad and Janet because my dad made sexual advances towards her.
Wow.
She didn't talk to them for almost 10 years after she moved out of the house. Right the summer before everything happened, she was over at the house visiting, and he actually assaulted my dad when he was drunk and kicked him on the ground, and he was, like, hanging all over my stepmom while she was sick and, from her cancer. She was like, get off of her, you drunk. And so I'm like, okay, Angie can't handle it, and she has to assault him, and she's a grown woman.
Yeah.
How's Isaiah supposed to handle it when he's there alone?
He was telling me he is now in a super max prison, like maximum security is the worst of the worst. And he told me some stories about some of the people who are in there with him, and it's not good. But he seems to get along with everybody really well there. He said, though, that the way it works is he will not probably ever get parole where he's at right now, because he said nobody gets paroled from a supermax prison. But what he really wants is to be transferred to a lower security prison where they have better options for therapy and counseling and rehab, and he said that's his goal.
You don't get paroled out of maximum. You get paroled out of a minimum security. like Fort Dodge or
Yeah.
Hermosa. I think he wants to go to Fort Dodge.
Yes.
He said that because he can't complete the programs that are required to be paroled out because they don't offer them at maximum security, so he needs to be transferred.
I think that's so not funny, but it's just kind of crazy. Like, they'll offer you parole every year. You know, you can have your parole hearing every year, but we're not going to offer you the classes and the things that you need to do to get parole. That makes zero sense.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it's,
But he had said that there was other juvenile lifers that have been paroled out since they overturned that with the Supreme Court.
Yeah, his case was a landmark case. He saved so many other minors from mandatory life in prison. So because of that, there are other people who have been paroled and have a chance. And he's been doing so many good things with his life. He has been involved, it sounds like, in so many worthwhile organizations, and he got his some accreditation for career things, and he reads. It sounds like he just reads a ton. He really, really wants to get his associate's degree and go to college, and he wants to kind of make the world a better place, it sounds like.
Yeah, he would definitely be a very productive member of society.
Yeah.
He has a lot to offer.
He does. I agree. He's your son. He's your baby. And he took the lives of your mom and your dad. And I know that's a huge thing. Have you forgiven him for that?
I went through phases where I had to question myself, probably for 2 or 3 years. Am I supposed to grieve for them? And I don't grieve them. I think that, the person my dad was when I was a little girl, that's been long gone for me. I think that I went through a really hard time emotionally. What I went through, the phases I went through with it were, I'll never grieve them because they destroyed my son. They did this to my son. There's no way that I could ever forgive them for that. I was so angry and resentful towards them. I was never mad at Isaiah for this.
Yeah.
I never was mad at him, ever. Yeah, I wasn't proud of him by any means, but I was never mad at him. I understood.
Because you went through it yourself.
Yeah, and I think the hardest part about healing for me was that I needed to lean on God, and I felt so guilty about hating them that I felt like I couldn't talk to God. I felt like I didn't have any business coming to God and asking Him to provide me comfort when I had so much hatred in my heart. I had to get through that and work a way to get rid of all the hatred. Mm-hmm. And the way that I got through that was that I had a brother. When you have an illness, if you have cancer or, you have anorexia or God had an illness. And Janet was obviously mentally ill. She was very mentally ill. She was a very cruel woman. And I think it was from mental illness. But you have to look at them like they had an illness. Like alcoholism is an illness. It's a sickness. That person isn't their illness. So I had to separate who my dad was from his illness. With Janet, there were things that different phases I went through with being angry with them because Isaiah told me things that they had done to him that I never knew about. Mm-hmm. And I was like, if I would have known this, I would have killed him myself. I didn't really grieve for them. I don't have any grief for them. I don't feel lost.
I think that's normal. Given everything you have gone through, I think that's a normal human response. But you are grieving for Isaiah, and
absolutely.
And it's kind of like you're grieving for him for his whole life, everything he went through from a young age, yeah.
And then I really was grieving that didn't get to, when I would see kids out on their skateboards and bikes, he loved to do that, BMX stuff, and he was outside all the time, and I would see, these young kids free and happy, and it made me so sad. When his friends getting married, his friends graduating, and his friends having babies, and it made me sad.
Well, I'm not a lawyer or anything like that, but
I do have a podcast, and I do have some really good friends who have audiences of 1 million people, so I'm going to spread the word. What I'm really going to talk about is everything Isaiah went through, and the life in prison sentence, and all the good he's done since this happened, and everything leading up to it, because a lot of people would want to call him a monster. You can do that, but there is something that made that monster, and he's not a monster by any means, and he never was. He was a victim too, so. What do you think his life is going to be like one day when he's out of prison? What do you want for him?
I want him to just fulfill his heart's desire. I mean, he really wants to help, teenagers and start a nonprofit, and I want him to do that, and I want him to feel proud of himself. I want him to feel happy. I want him to feel like he's got all this in him that he wants to project out into the world, and I just want him to be able to do that. I want him to be happy. I want him to do whatever his heart desires. If he doesn't want to have kids, if he doesn't want to get married, it doesn't matter to me as long as he's happy.
Exactly.
I want him to be happy.
He should be proud of himself. He has come very far. Very far. He's accomplished a lot. So he should be proud of himself, and I hope he is. It sounds like he is. I think he's forgiven himself. I know he still goes through a lot of stuff, but from the few conversations I've had with him, he sounds like he's doing okay.
I think he's doing okay, too. He's always optimistic. He always has a great attitude, and he is not a quitter. There's no quitter in him at all.
I can tell. And I can tell he needs to be around people, too. He seems like a very social person.
Yeah. Definitely. I appreciate you so much, and I appreciate you getting his story out there. It means a lot to us.
Thank you for listening to this second episode in my Isaiah Sweet series. Speaking with Isaiah's mother, Stacy Sweet, has shed more light into what led up to the murders of Janet and Richard Sweet on Mother's Day weekend 2012. I think it's very important to recognize that Isaiah Sweet, from the time he was born, was a victim of mental, physical, and sexual abuse, as well as neglect. He experienced trauma after trauma and was not given the kind of intervention that was needed. In one horrible moment, fueled by mental illness and drug use, he made a terrible decision that could never be taken back. But at 17, he was just a child. Doctors even testified at the trial that he had the emotional capacity and reasoning skills of a 12-year-old. Now, even a 12-year-old knows the difference between right and wrong, but they do not have the anger management skills and brain development of an adult. In this podcast series discussing Isaiah, I want to remind people that he's not a monster. He is one case in which rehabilitation is possible, but that's not possible if he stays behind the prison walls of the maximum security prison that currently holds him, because mental health treatment, counseling, and many of the essential therapies he needs are just not available there. Additionally, Isaiah has the possibility of parole, but in order to get parole, he needs to complete a series of courses that are not available at his maximum security prison. So what's needed and is completely warranted here is a transfer to a medium security or minimum security prison. Isaiah murdered his abusers, plain and simple, and he was acting out after years of torture and abuse. He is a murderer. He did the wrong thing. He made a terrible decision. He was wrong for that. But he deserves a chance at life outside the prison walls.